Hey everyone, this is writing micro lesson number 2 on crafting the thesis statement. And this is for Honors 112 in the Civilization sequence of the Honors College at the University of Maine. I'm the instructor, Rob Glover. So we're shifting gears a little bit this week. We talked initially about idea generation and how to pull an idea out of a text and think about where you stand in relation to it. And so now we're actually going to talk about writing, and you're going to begin these weekly assignments in which you're practicing foundational elements of writing and getting feedback from me and thinking about how to become a better writer overall. Remember, the goal is to create a checklist of writing best practices that you kind of put in your pocket and take with you for future college level writing. So let me say a few things about argumentative writing. Argumentative writing does not necessarily mean an argument. It doesn't mean a heated debate with someone that you disagree with, or it doesn't mean kind of framing your ideas in a way that's confrontational or conflictual. All argumentative writing refers to is trying to answer questions or make claims with recourse to evidence of some kind, right? So imagine you put forth a statement, you put forth a claim, and somebody says to you, well, can you prove it? And argumentative writing, if you're doing this in writing, would be your attempt to defend that larger claim that you're making. Now, it doesn't necessarily stand in distinction to what we were talking about with dialectical thinking. You can be fluid in your ideas. You can recognize that there are other ways of thinking about a question or a topic. There's other ways of responding to a question and understanding a truth or a reality. And you can acknowledge them even. You can say, you know, people that look at this topic this way have a point when they say X, Y, or Z. So you can integrate ideas that actually conflict with the argument that you're making. But the core thing that you're trying to do is support your own claim. You're trying to provide evidence for your reader that supports that larger claim that you're going to make. So we start with the foundational element of argumentative writing, which is the thesis statements. And you've probably talked about thesis statements before. You've had instruction on how to craft a thesis statement. But I find it's something that students and sometimes even fellow faculty members or writers struggle with, is the thesis statement. How do you craft a quality thesis statement? So I always start with a metaphor when I talk about the thesis statement. Imagine you're walking down the street and all of a sudden a car goes by. You recognize the person driving the car. They pull over to the side of the road. You walk up to the car. It's somebody you know. It's a friend, somebody you trust. And they say, hey, get in the car. Come on. I'm going to show you something. So you trust this person, and you get in the car. And what's the first thing you ask them? You say, okay, where are we going? And if they were to not give you that information, you would at best be slightly annoyed. And at worst, you might start to be kind of concerned. Like, what is this person up to? Why won't they tell me where we're going? And we have that same desire to know where it is that we're going when we're reading. And if we're not told that, if it's unclear to us why we're going to devote time and intellectual energy to something, we'll either get annoyed or frustrated, or we'll give up. And that's probably the more common thing. So if you're reading something, it's challenging to read it, it doesn't seem to have a clear direction, you're very likely to give up on reading it. So the thesis statement is in a way, it's an intellectual destination. It's saying to your reader, okay, here's where we're going. This is where I'm going to take you. And then the subsequent development of the paper is kind of laying out the road to get you to that intellectual destination. So in analytical and argumentative writing, a thesis statement typically appears at the end of your introductory paragraph. So you don't want to sandwich it in the middle of a longer paragraph. You don't want to bury it a page and a half or 2 pages into your writing. You want it to be clear right from the outset, especially for shorter essays like the type you'll be writing in this class. A 500-word essay, the reader should know almost immediately where the writer is going to take them. And all the thesis statement does is present the main point or argument of the essay, which is then going to be supported with evidence as you develop the paper, right? So that should come right at the close of that introductory paragraph. You establish a little bit of context. you situate your reader, and then you make it clear what it is you're going to say. And then the subsequent paragraphs will be presenting the evidence that will support that larger claim. Okay? So for the reader, all that thesis statement does is tells them what that intellectual destination is. And if they're intrigued, if you've crafted an interesting thesis statement, then they'll keep reading. And they'll understand what you're laying out for them better because they know where you're headed. Okay. Now, for you, this is also helpful. This isn't something you simply do for your reader. This helps keep you on track in reaching your intellectual destination, particularly for longer papers, even, 5-6 pages, double spaced. It's easy to get sidetracked in the same way that you would with a conversation. You start to make a point and end up on a tangent, and all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, you're saying, what was it that I was trying to say? Where was I going with this? We do that in writing too. And it's not uncommon for me to read a paper from a student, and as I look at the conclusion and some of the final paragraphs, I look back to the thesis statement. I say, they started claiming that they were going to talk about one thing, and they finished the paper talking about something really different. So the thesis statement keeps you on track. It's a way to ensure that you're disciplined and you adhere to the point that you're going to make. And if you have a solid thesis statement that clearly lays out where you're going to go with your writing, it's easier to do that. So it's just as much for you as it is for the reader. Now, there's 3 core components of a quality thesis statement in argumentative writing of this type. And these are the elements that I'm going to be looking for in your weekly assignment this week, your short essay in response to these prompts. The first is that it's concise and specific. So you have to think about what you can realistically claim and defend in the context of whatever paper it is that you're working on. A 500-word essay, a 10-page paper, a book series, right? There's variations in what you can legitimately claim to present and defend in those different types of writing. And if you're not concise and specific, you'll end up writing something that can't help but be superficial and really only scratch the surface of a topic if it's too broad. So you want to try to narrow down that argument as much as possible. It also has to be arguable. So it has to be the type of thing that someone could look at and say, that's interesting. I'm intrigued, but I'm not convinced. Prove it to me. Okay? And then you would do so utilizing whatever evidence you can to defend that argument. And that's really the third point of the thesis statement, is there has to be some form of evidence that you can use to defend it. So in the case of this class, a lot of your writing will be utilizing textual evidence, going to the book that we've read and making an argument on the basis of that evidence and utilizing that evidence. So there could be other forms of evidence, and for the writing that you do in your major, it might be really different. So I'm a political scientist. A lot of our evidence is data. It's quantitative data about social and political phenomena. It could be public opinion polling. It could be content analysis, where we take a text or a piece of speech and we analyze the different words and the different ideas. There's all sorts of different ways that you can utilize different forms of evidence to defend a claim. But the vast majority of your evidence for this class is going to be textual evidence that you're drawing from the books that you've already read. But the idea is that there needs to be some form of evidence. It has to be defensible. It can't be the type of thing that there is no existing evidence to prove it or to make a case for it. So those are the core components of a quality thesis statement. And as I said, that's what I'm going to be looking for this week in your short essays. Really take some time and look at your thesis statement and try to figure out whether or not it conforms with those expectations. Now I'll close with kind of a tale of 2 thesis statements. And you could imagine these thesis statements offered in response to a question about this week's text by Vitruvius. Let me read the weaker one first, and then I'll read the stronger, and we'll talk about why number 1 is weaker and number 2 is stronger. So the weaker one says, Vitruvius's text, The 10 Books on Architecture, offers insights that are still applicable today. That's the weaker thesis statement. The stronger thesis statement states, Vitruvius understood that the architect must have a profound understanding of the culture and physical landscape in which they work, insights too often forgotten today. So the weaker thesis statement is largely due to the fact that that doesn't offer a clear destination, and that's probably too wide in scope to argue in the context of a 500-word essay, right? It's enormous. It's not clear what specific insights they're talking about. It's not clear where they're going to go, what type of evidence they would use to defend that claim. So it's very open-ended and really unclear what the eventual destination is for your reader. And as a writer, it doesn't give you a lot of guidance in terms of how you would structure the essay, right? If you wrote that on a Post-it note, put it up on the corner of your computer screen and tried to write this essay, you're going to struggle a lot to figure out, how do I actually structure this essay? The stronger thesis statement has a lot more packed in there. It's not much longer, right? There's not a lot more words there, but there's a lot more specificity there. So you're making an argument about Vitruvius. You're saying that he claimed that the architect needed to have a profound understanding of both cultural landscape and physical landscape. And you're making a claim about today. You're saying that this is too often forgotten today. So there's a claim by Vitruvius that you're agreeing with. There's narrowing down that claim into some specific subdimensions. And then you're also making kind of a critique of the contemporary artistic and architectural space. And you'd ultimately be saying there's too many buildings that just don't align with what is happening culturally, and they don't really fit within the physical landscape. So they stick out both in a cultural sense and in a physical and environmental sense. That's a lot more specific. Your reader knows where you're going to go. You as the writer have a lot of guidance in terms of how you're going to structure that argument and how you lay out the subsequent paragraphs and incorporate evidence in order to defend it. So hopefully, as you look at these and we talk about them a little bit, it's clearer what the stronger thesis statement is. But if you need to refer back to something, refer back to these 3 points. When you write a thesis statement, ask yourself, is it concise and specific? Could it potentially be arguable? Could someone disagree or challenge me to prove that statement? And is there some evidence that I could utilize either within the text or beyond the text to support it? If you need additional resources here, there's a number of great websites devoted to writing. But these two in particular deal with thesis statements. So one is the Purdue Online Writing Lab, which you're going to see that oftentimes I'll use that as a go-to resource for students who are struggling with writing. There's also the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana campus has their Center for Writing Studies. And this handout is slightly different. It's looking at thesis statements that are kind of substandard and then going through the different steps to make them better. So the links are there, but if you Google searched either of these things, you'd be able to find them pretty easily as well. And I encourage you to consult those resources if you struggle a little bit. It's okay to struggle with the thesis statement. It's an important skill to get down because it's so foundational that oftentimes all of the subsequent writing can suffer if students don't have those abilities in terms of constructing the thesis statement. I know some really good writers that they had trouble crafting thesis statements and their writing seemed substandard as a result, but when you look at it, it's really just lack of clarity in the thesis statement. And once you work that out, you become a much stronger writer. Everything kind of falls into place around it. So I encourage you to spend some time with this. And as I said, the assignment itself is really looking at these 3 specific dimensions. So now that you've watched the video, you can head over, look at the prompts and the rubric for this week. And when you're ready to start writing, you've thought about your ideas a little bit, go ahead and put together that 500-word essay. And I look forward to reading your work. Thanks very much.